Hello, 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 hello. It is your good friend Wild Philosopher here once more to remind you that fairies are real. And today we have a very special, we call it Supernatural Thursday, Mystical Thursday, Thor Channeling Thursday,
Enchanted Thursday.
Enchanted Thursday, Enchanted Thursday. Yeah, last time we were here, we were off strangling Jormungandr, the great serpent. And today we're also here to talk once more about serpents, or should I say exploding comets. Uh, because today we are here to talk about the theories of Graham Hancock. Now, Graham Hancock is, I think it's safe to say, is the most influential ancient aliens theorist of our time, eh?
Yeah,
Yeah,
although,
reasonable
well,
statement.
a better term would be alternative theorist because Kia rejects the ancient aliens hypothesis. Although I
Hmm.
guess I guess you could say what he supports is akin to that. But yeah, it's an alternative theorist, we'll say.
Okay, yeah. Actually, that is a good point, because we sometimes pigeonhole when we talk about ancient aliens, we're pigeonholing them into this branch of, like, it's like there's this one history that's the materialistic, true scientific history, and then there's the ancient aliens history, which is just false.
Yeah,
Um, and then, like, in practice, that's not what anyone believes. It would be more correct to say there's hundreds and hundreds of histories, most of which have some element of the supernatural in them. And then there's the materialistic history we're told to believe by our teachers, not
yeah,
by the mysterious them. Um, and then there's several different, because yeah, we'll get into this now. Like, there's the ancient aliens hypothesis, right, which is best associated with Sitchin. There's Hancock's unique theories, which have centered mostly around Atlantis and the notion that its survivors traveled the globe after a monumental catastrophe that ended the Ice Age, or at the end of, sorry, the Ice
yeah.
Age.
At the end, yeah,
And then you have aliens getting integrated into an increasing number of like sort of intersectional theories. Jeffrey Krippel's Superhumanities is a great example. Um, a lot of he's the guy who's basically or explicitly in charge of the Rice University religion department, and he has trained a large number of disciples who are spreading out through the world with his sort of interpretations. There was a recent book on the American mystic, alchemist, and immortal Johannes Kelpius that connected him to UFO phenomena, published by a disciple of Cripple who does teach at an American university. I can't remember which one off the top of. Actually, I think it was even called Apocalypse or American Aurora. My bad, American Aurora. But yeah, we talk Hancock, proponent of an alternative theory regarding mankind's archaeological prehistory. He thinks there was we said not quite global, or maybe international instead of global, because I don't think he thinks it covered the planet. I think he just thinks it was all over the planet.
yeah. I would say something like far-reaching,
Yes, yeah,
nice and
far reach.
ambiguous.
Yeah, far reach. Yeah, similar to the modern U.S. Right.
Yeah,
It's not global. It's just, yeah, far reaching. Far reaching state of Atlantis, which was destroyed. He thinks it was destroyed at the um,
at the end of the Ice Age,
younger Dryas.
yeah,
Yeah.
Younger Dryas,
Okay. Sorry. It's
which is
been.
yeah, young end of the Ice Age.
Yeah. You, Ryan. Here, you've read some of his books. Yes.
Not really. I haven't had time to actually. I just listened to a lot of his interviews
Mm.
and podcasts that he's on. I probably should read some of his stuff. I haven't really gotten around to it. Not really on my list of priorities at the moment. But yeah, I can like I've listened to the podcasts he's been on with Joe Rogan. others. And yeah, he kind of outlines his theory pretty well there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so Ryan definitely knows more about the man than I do. This is going to be a provisional podcast because we are purely focused on the TV show. So we
Yes.
will be talking about Hancock. It's going to be critical. Certainly not as critical as some of the absolutely lunatical attacks that poor man has faced, but definitely critical, mostly from a philosophical angle. We'll be examining elements of his methodology, his use of symbolism, the way
Hermeneutic.
the way he exegetes myths. As Ryan said, his hermeneutics.
Yeah.
But I'm going to say it is provisional because what you're going to get in a TV show, what you're going to get in an online interview, is going to be much less lengthy than what you might expect to get in a book. Right, which is why, as I said, we'll mostly be focusing on questions of method, because I think it might be overstepping to deal too heavily with specific pieces of evidence, where he might have better arguments in his writings. So I'm going to apologize if that upsets anyone now, but you always want to make your argument as good as possible, and it means acknowledging its limitations.
Yeah.
So, we'll be mostly focused on the Americas, his second season. We'll be talking a lot about some of the earlier ones too, because I feel my general impression watching this, I'm going to break a lot of people's hearts here and say that I think modern archaeology is increasingly veered into pseudoscience. A lot of its interpretations are just now moved into unfalsifiability. And the fact that they have yearly meetings where they conclude what research is socially and politically acceptable to have and conclude is not exactly inspiring as to the integrity of the research being conducted. Hancock's opponents are excellent examples of this, almost hilariously so, given that the methodology they're claiming to champion is actually rather outmoded so far as intersectional theorists are concerned. Cough, cough, dibble, cough, cough. But with that being said, I'm bringing this up now because, hot take here. Neither of us believe that space aliens had a major impact on history.
No.
At least not ancient history. I'd be willing. It might be a different map.
So far from what we've seen.
Yes, I've read quite a few. I was maybe not so expert in Hancock, but I've read Sitchin. I've read Daniken. I read Ted Holiday, not too famous Loch Ness monster hunter. Actually, a very good Loch Ness monster hunter. He was involved in the early teams that started to get sonar on the beast. But unfortunately, he was prone to flights of fantasy, and his ultimate conclusion is that all of history is a battle between space aliens and demonic jello krakens. Which is an excellent... sometimes you can trust people for, one topic because they know more on that one, namely looking at stuff that's right in front of their face. And then when they start handling archaeological remnants, they become much less reliable. Cough, cough, Ted Holiday. Cough, cough. For anyone who's wondering, Holiday discovered the Chaoskampf motif independently of researchers and then promptly, aggressively misunderstood it. And thus the battle between the sky god and the chaos serpent became spacecraft and the Loch Ness monster, which he thought was the Jello Kraken. But yeah, I've read quite a few ancient aliens. I have not been convinced, mostly because I happen to know the actual symbolic meanings behind, and we'll be getting into that as we behind a great deal of the random discs and strange lights and so all the other stuff that tends to get argued as some sort of evidence of spacecrafts.
Yeah.
Maybe a different matter if we're talking about 20th century history. Just because the number of people who believe in UFOs and are involved in important historical events is sufficient to say that UFOs have impacted the 20th century in a major way, even if there are no UFOs. I don't. We'll lay that question aside for the moment. We did an earlier stream on spacecraft.
Yeah.
Don't want to rehash that too, but yeah. So neither of us were especially inclined to UFOs and the claim that they significantly impacted man's primordial past before this. Hancock's arguments did not. I won't say they didn't especially impress me because there were some really interesting ones out there. But all they convinced me is that archaeologists are just really weird about their conclusions, which I didn't need Hancock to let me know. No disrespect to him. I've groaned over more than enough papers by archaeologists and anthropologists over the years to know that quite a number of their conclusions are A, wrong, B, predicated on far sketchier evidence than they want to admit, and C, held for very strange reasons that often have little to do with the evidence in question. But Hancock's own, in neither season has he presented sustained argument to reach his conclusion. Other than, the major piece of argument he keeps drawing on is the one that I find the most speculative, and that's his dating of a lot of these monuments. Would you say that's an apt take?
Yeah, the dating of the monuments in conjunction with how they align with Plato's date for the sinking of Atlantis, which just so happens to be, the end of the Ice Age, the Younger Dryas. And there are theories out there, actual academic theories floating around out there on how the Younger Dryas end, what was the impact it had on, geology, climatology, whatever, the environment. And he's trying to align, all the traditions of the Great Flood with each other and say, okay, the Younger Dryas seems to be the case. Seems to be seems to fit the bill for all of these myths, which is why he tries to push the dates so far back.
Yes. And I do think in several cases he presents very convincing arguments that a lot of these are much older than modern archaeologists want to admit.
Yes.
I happen to be familiar with the scandal over Gunung Padang, and that was absolutely shameful on the part of archaeologists. They basically it was an Indonesian team, and you see this on the TV show that reached the conclusion, and they accused them of being racist against Indonesians, and then said that the paper should be retracted because it reached conclusions that disagreed with modern archaeology, and they basically bullied the publisher into retracting it. And then they went to all the major retraction sites in the US and were like, this paper was retracted for being pseudoscience, but it was never falsified. Never actually falsified it. They just concluded it must be pseudoscience because the dates don't line up with their internal chronology.
Yeah, and even if it was falsified, you don't retract papers for being falsified unless they're really bad. Or just, yeah. I don't know if they're if there's plagiarism. Which there wasn't.
Maybe
not.
There was no plagiarism. They disliked the methodology, but it's a standard methodology used elsewhere. They just didn't like the conclusions. It was similar to when, back in 2011, Daryl J. Bem published a meta-study proving that precognition is statistically significant in one of the biggest psychology journals, and because skeptics couldn't get it retracted because it hit all the mandatory methodological hallmarkers, their conclusion was that therefore psychology isn't real.
Oh, That's the foundation you use. Okay. That's
Yes,
psychology.
it was an absolute. That one was an absolutely wild, and it's like if they wanted to conclude that psychology isn't real, fine. That's they're allow. I'm certainly not going to argue, but let's just be consistent about it and stop using psychology to like psychoanalyze religious people, because a lot of the people making that claim were the ones who were also off publishing on Schirmer's pattern recognition thesis, which is very much rooted in psychology. So you can, yeah. Anyway, sorry, I'm getting off target here. Getting back onto Hancock. Yeah, he thinks he wants to date these monuments, and he's interested in the use of astronomical symbolism in the monuments. Mostly to Sirius the Dog Star, but he does talk about quite a few other ones, including the Sun and the Pole Star. And he is especially interested in the continuation of snake imagery, which he thinks is reflective of comets. We will get into most of this throughout this topic, or throughout this little presentation here. I did not think the argument mounted was sufficient to reach the conclusions derived. I know, like, I don't, accepting most of what he says, I do not think he actually mounts a strong enough conclusion to justify his own premises.
I agree.
Yeah. Like,
No, I
even if,
agree. It's
yeah,
it's fun. It's imaginative. It's fun. I think things like this are necessary, actually, for the growth of a field of study. Um, and I felt like his contribution is more just on the imaginative, speculative side. But I'd have to agree. I don't think he didn't provide, yeah, a thorough or sufficient enough conclusion.
yeah,
Sufficient enough data for his conclusion. So yeah, I
yeah.
agree.
As an imaginative exercise, yeah, it's amazing. And that's not even a dismissive or a critical remark. I absolutely agree with Ryan that a great deal of intellectual activity is what if.
Yeah,
Right. What if, and this isn't just like this was Goethe who, like, I know people know he wrote Faust. I don't think people realize he was involved in a lot of scientific experimentation. There's a human bone named after him, the Goethe bone.
mhm.
Did a lot of work. Most his work on colors isn't accepted, and his work on plants has since been superseded. But he did a lot of good work on morphology and geology. This was Goethe's thesis too, like, and it was also Wittgenstein's. And actually, it's been the thesis of most of history's more intelligent and sensible thinkers. That, yeah, imaginative synthesis is absolutely integral to human thought, even if it doesn't do anything. Right, that because it's simply that playing that what if game that opens up new possibilities. Wittgenstein even offered practical instructions on some of how to do this when he started talking about like aspect perception. It's that sort of the quintessential example in his work is the ability to look at the moon and see a human face. Like, we all know rationally that the moon is not a giant human face hovering in the sky.
Says
But
you.
says I. Yeah, actually, I shouldn't say we all know that because it's not like I've been to the moon. And as far as I know, nobody's falsified that hypothesis. So maybe the moon is a giant face. But yeah, it's like, what if you look at the moon as a giant face or as a rabbit stirring a pot, which is the Chinese reading, it's all of a sudden it totally changes your perception of it. Right. And it just opens up, Colin Wilson called them new vistas of the imagination. And just in that respect, like, actually, we'll get to some of what Hancock did in this show was absolutely amazing. Even if you think he's full of nonsense, some of what he did in this show was absolutely amazing, and especially in terms of some of the less controversial conclusions he derives of immense use, I think, to humanity going forward. We we had a list of episode by episode points we wanted to bring up, but I'm going to leap ahead because this is to the Amazonian geoglyphs, right?
Yeah.
If that's safe, we'll leap to the Amazonian. It's a good spot. So, just for the record, I'm going to spoil the show like mad here. I'm not going to apologize for any of this. This is just spoiling. This is a discussion of the show. I'm just going to spoil it. Episode 1 of season 2, Hancock goes to the Amazon. The rainforest, not your friendly local mega giant office. Nor is he fighting naked warrior woman in northern Thrace. Tragically.
Or in Africa.
Or in Africa. Yeah, season 3 of Ancient Apocalypse. The other Amazon. Him versus Hippolyta. No.
Him versus Jeff Bezos.
The Amazon match we were waiting for. Sorry. He goes to the Amazon and he looks at these. So at geoglyph, he goes to look at this geoglyph, and a geoglyph, for those who don't know, is it's. I'm going to be real cringe here. It's the non-alien equivalent of a crop circle. No. It's a giant shape carved into the earth. The best known examples are going to be the Nazca lines of Peru, and they're in Nazca lines of Peru, and the white horse of. It's in England. I saw it in England. Why am I sitting here wondering where it is? I saw it.
The Uffington White Horse.
Yes, the one that they think might actually be a dragon.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, I have read some interesting arguments that it's actually a dragon, which is sort of. I think it go either way, because horses are super important to the Welsh.
Yeah.
But dragons are also super important, maybe more important. So yeah, could easily. Anywho, he goes to see this geoglyph, and it's like, oh, so that's nice. It's just some geoglyphs in the Amazon, and then they start zooming out. I'm speaking and they're zooming out, and there are tens and tens of thousands. I think they said there's almost 200,000 of them. How many? Do you remember the figure of geoglyphs?
I don't recall, but it was a lot. It was a lot.
It was a genuinely insane number, stretching all over the modern Amazon, built with exacting precision, under the Amazonian jungle, and then. This one was so mind-blowing, I actually went and independently looked. Like, some of this stuff I just watched, and then reached my own conclusions, which I know is going to be lame to the archaeologists watching. They're like, you can't do that, but it's like, I didn't really need to look up the Peary Rice map to know that Hancock was spewing a load of garbage on that one. No disrespect, Mr. Hancock, sir. But the Amazon, like, this one was so mind-blowing, I looked it up, and apparently it is now common knowledge that under the trees of the Amazon, there is this massive, multi-country, or half a continent long, formation of, geoglyphs carved, as I said, with exacting precision into the soil. Connected end to end, probably the sites of human habitation. Not to say that they're the markers of buildings, just to say that they were either near or directly to the surrounding human buildings, which tragically have not survived. And that this civilization, which numbered, they said 20 million people? I've seen 3 million. Looking it up produced similar figures of at least several million, well over 10 million, which is nowadays, I think, what the population of the Amazon totals, a few 100,000. It's really not a lot.
Yeah.
And that far from being a natural forest, like this just existed since time immemorial, the Amazon rainforest as we know it today was intentionally cultivated by this civilization. Right, so this totally mysterious civilization that vanished just slightly before the European colonization. I think they mentioned one. I looked at one guy called the Carvajal was able to track it down, but yeah, mostly vanished. Like it was just this across this entire continent, and the Amazon rainforest is basically this legacy, this absolutely colossal feat of like bioengineering that they passed down to their descendants, down from antiquity, or down to us. Sorry, I should say. And in order to do this, they went and they developed their own soil. Which anyone who knows anything, like I'm not a great archaeologist, but I do know a little bit about soil, and that was mind-blowing. That was just mind-blowing. They were so far ahead of anything we've managed to pull off in modern agriculture. And they did it all like without, I mean, there was no evidence that they had any writing or anything of that sort, like totally oral civilized. And Hancock is sort of ignoring orality. I think that's pretty typical for archaeologists, eh?
Yeah.
They tend not to like, well, I shouldn't say he is ignoring orality. It would be, well, actually, we'll get to his use of orality because he's using some elements of orality, but I don't know if he fully grasps what orality entails as regards ancient technology. But yeah, it blew my mind. Like, we sometimes talk, anyone who gets into history will very quickly have the theory of the March of Progress blown out of their head. I know it's super commonly accepted, especially for those of you who have to suffer through America in your press, especially the American press, you know, that the lives of our ancestors were just brutally awful, and they sucked, and they were all superstitious and had no science, and then they died. And then all of a sudden, science was invented, and we developed civilization. Anyone who has done much history will have that pounded out of their heads pretty early, for many reasons, some of which aren't necessarily worth going over here. But amongst them, the fact that science was independently invented several times, because it's a method, not a body of knowledge, as some people seem hell-bent on insisting. Cough, cough. Dibble. Cough, cough. But also, yeah, like, I kind of wanted to deal with technology, the lack of unity of technology separately. Also, so I'll earmark here also because of the disunity of technology. And I know that's a weird phrase. I will touch on that again in 5 minutes because I just want to finish up the Amazon. And you'll sometimes read about this. It comes up along when you're studying the Sumerians or the Chinese, or some of the more ancient African peoples. But it's not until I'm looking at this evidence of this totally lost Amazonian civilization. And as I said, like, I'm not going to take anything Hancock says at face value. Especially, Ryan, you remember that meme I sent you, eh?
Yes.
Let me pull it up for the benefit of our audience here. That was genuinely one of the funniest sentences I have. Here. Here, hold up. So much so, yeah, like. Sorry. I'm still dying. This is when he goes to Göbekli Tepe, and he's like, "These are whirling dervishes."
No, that was Darren Kuyu, actually.
Oh yeah, sorry, Darren. Well, same area.
Yes, Turkey. Yeah.
Yeah, Cappadocia, the Cappadocia region of Turkey. After Göbekli Tepe, he goes to Darren Kuyu. He says, "These are whirling dervishes," and I'm like, "All right." He says, "Devout followers of a religion called Sufism." I'm like, "The what now?" It's like one of the few remnants of the ancient culture of Zoroastrianism.
It's like, you got a few things wrong there. Great, sorry. No.
I'm just sorry. That one was just killing me. That one just killed me. So for those who don't, sitting there like, why are they like Sufism is not a religion; it's a sect of Islam.
Yes.
And I won't say it has nothing to do with Zoroastrianism, but whatever it is to do with Zoroastrianism is from, yeah, yeah. Patui says, "Boy, won't some of my Persian friends be surprised to know that they don't exist anymore." Yeah, this was Jenner. You probably know one of Hancock's finest moments. This one was just killing me. So I did cross-reference everything he was saying about the Amazon. I was able to track down some of the people he interviews do not publish in English, although I was able to track down that Angela Araujo, who he was talking to about the Terra Preta. So I was able to find her papers. That guy was talking to, was it Matti Parsonen or Mark Parsonen? I want to say Matti Parsonen.
Yeah.
He's talking to this guy Parsonen, who's a Finnish anthropologist studying the geoglyphs, and I was able to track him down and conclude that yes, Parsonen works in this field. Yes, he's actually very well respected. Hancock keeps talking about him versus the archaeologists, and I think it might be more correct to say Hancock versus like pop archaeology and major archaeological institutions.
Well, he said before that he doesn't think it's all archaeologists that are like this when they come out, like rabid animals going frothing at the mouth, like, he admits that no, he doesn't think there's a conspiracy. He just thinks it's actually a small group of people. Again, it's, the vocal minority.
Yeah. That tends to a lot of it's this. And let's be fair or very clear here that this isn't a unique flaw of archaeology or even of science. It's for any orthodoxy that gets established, you end up with this group of basically thugs. Like they're basically just thugs who they have no values, they have no real beliefs, they have no standard of conduct. They just exist to defend the orthodoxy. Right, and they are absolutely pearl-clutchingly incensed at anyone who dissents from the orthodoxy. You have this with everything. And it's going to be really annoying people because it's knee-jerk responses, right? Which aren't considered and are usually, often end up being wrong, even if the orthodoxy itself is correct, even if the orthodoxy is correct. But yeah, as I looked up Parsonen, he did a lot of research onto it. He demonstrated, I want to say back in 2020, I found a study by him demonstrating that each of these geoglyphs, each and every one of these geoglyphs took one person. Let's assume it was one. If it was one person making it, it took 8,000 days for that person to build that geoglyph. And as I said, there's well over 100,000 of them. Or so something to that. I cannot remember the exact number. Somebody's going to call me out. He's be like, actually, there's over 97,000. There's tens and tens and tens of thousands of them. An unspecified colossal number just all over the Amazon. The sheer scale of that is breathtaking. Other researchers, so not the ones who were interviewed on Hancock's show, but some of the ones. I was reading an article on the Smith. I want to say it was the Smiths. I read about a dozen articles on this topic before I did this. I want to say it was the Smithsonian was talking about how the current number one theory is that the people of this civilization built their houses in line with sacred ritual geography. And the geoglyphs are representations of that spiritual, geocosmology, basically.
Wow.
Which is inferential and speculative, but isn't especially ridiculous. I've met a few of the Kuna people of Panama, which is just to the north of, a few hundred kilometers and 2 countries to the north of where, and they certainly use geometry in much the same way, as did the Peruvians. Which isn't to say the symbols are the same, because I think we might return to this later, but I don't know if I need to say too much on it. I think one of my issues with Hancock is he tends to fall into a very common trap with those who do comparative scholarship, which is they note a parallel, but don't think to ask if it has emic significance. So we talk about emic significance, and whenever Ryan or I or Hound present a parallel between 2 things, so I say, the dragon here and the dragon there have the same symbolism. It's not that it's a dragon, so it's the same sign in both cases. It's before I present that, I go down into the nitty-gritty and I establish that both cultures internally, from their own perspectives, placed very similar values on the meanings of these signs. And that doesn't always hold true. Like, I would not say you will not see me and Ryan doing a lecture on the universal meaning of wolves. Right.
Yeah.
Why? Because wolf symbolism varies wildly from location to location. Lion symbolism's a little more standard, but even lion symbolism varies. And geometry definitely varies wildly from place to place. Different cultures have very different signs for geometry. And this isn't to say I don't think there's anything valuable to studying like spiritual geometry, or that I think it's false, or that I think it's all relative. But it is just to say that it's a fact that geometry, like Hancock just treats it all as the result of drug-induced visions. Not in a mean way, he just thinks that's what it is.
Well, he thinks ayahuasca or those kinds of hallucinogens, DMT, etc., are like the cornerstone of society, of civilization.
Yeah. He's not, when I said drug-induced, yeah.
Yeah. Which I reject, but yeah.
Yes, both of us reject that, but for the purposes of giving Hancock a fair shake, when he says it's all drug-induced visions, he means that as a compliment.
Yeah.
Whereas I have a much less positive view of ayahuasca.
Well, I mean, he views shamanism, or let's say all civilizations, as rooted in shamanism, basically.
Yes, which is based.
And it is,
but not for the reasons he thinks
it
is.
No, not for the reasons he thinks it is, yes.
Yes.
We agree, but not in the way, yeah.
It's that old meme from that guy from Breaking Bad, eh? You think shamanism is the basis of civilization because you like drugs. I think shamanism is the basis of civilization because of the enduring quest to unite man to the gods. You're not the same.
You're not the same, yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah.
But yeah, he takes geography. So he does geometry, the dog star, and snakes treats them as almost universal. And I think you could mount that argument for snakes.
Yeah.
I have explored snake symbolism very, very in depth in a lot of cultures, and consistently it is one of the most universally repeated features. We said what it was. Do you remember I was complaining years ago that like when you get into doing comparative religion, your expectation is you'll be studying really cool stuff like wolves and lions and hawks. Like all the stuff that we tend to think of as majestic or awesome, and you're like, obviously this is going to be this primordial symbol or whatever. But we were studying snakes, fetuses, and eggs.
Yeah.
Snakes, fetuses, eggs. What's it? Mountains, caves. Yeah. There definitely are universal symbols out there with oikotypal variations. Like it's not always the same symbol, and you want to be sensitive to when it might have different or additional additive meanings. But they're not the cool stuff.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you
Well,
could say that for like, birds of prey, raptors, dogs too. So it's kind of there.
yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, geometric signs are very colors too, and like there are.
Yeah.
Red does tend to be very commonly associated with the supernatural, but not universally.
No.
Not universally. You always want to be careful when you look at color symbolism, shape symbolism.
Well, red and
Um,
white. Red and white.
yes, yeah, body parts are another one. There's
Yeah.
a few body parts that are definitely universal. The male member and the female equivalent being the two most obvious. Uh, and then there's a bunch that are just definitely not universal, like ribs, feet. So yeah, and Hancock I think is treating a lot of this stuff as if it were more related than it is. Which I know you said before we started that you thought of Hancock as an amateur archaeologist. Yeah.
Yeah. Rather than a pseudo archaeologist or even a con artist, I just think he's amateur.
Yeah, yeah, I agree with you. It's not that I think he's doing like pseudoscience. I think you mentioned, and I'll just repeat your argument here for you that I think you sort of think he's his critics when they just accuse him of pseudo archaeology are trampling over the demarcation problem.
Yeah.
Um, when we say something is a pseudoscience, that usually has to do with procedural questions as to how it draws its conclusions, and they're switching from the science as a method to science as a body of knowledge, which is a far more controversial hypothesis, and with far more potentially negative conclusions. I know, for those who believe in science, like if you look at philosophers of science, for instance, the ones who think that science is a body of knowledge tend to be the ones who think science isn't real. The most famous figure I saw to sort of defend that view was Paul Feyerabend, who wrote the books, who famously wrote an entire book called Against Method. The reason most philosophers zero in on the method and are less concerned about the body of knowledge is it's much easier to defend the method as real than it is to defend the body of knowledge. And the method is also more proof against like arguments from politics, arguments from ideology, arguments from money. Much easier to make anti-scientific arguments if you can successfully equate what really good scientists are doing with what unscrupulous, highly corrupt individuals are doing. But yeah, back to the subject. So just to make it clear why we say some of the things we do. Amateur archaeology. You can really see that with his exegesis. You can really see that with how he's exegeting myths, symbols, signs, snake. Like the whole snake thing. I don't really. We didn't. For those watching who have not seen our channel before, we have an entire lecture on snake symbolism, and dragons. I do not see any reason to think it's meteorites. I think the snake is the much more obvious interpretation of the symbol.
I think he tries to connect all the serpent symbolism into a whole, or into a kind of collective memory of an ancient flood, which kind of works if you know what you're doing. I just don't interpret, like he interprets what we call Chaoskampf, right, as the meteor, or as the meteor, or meteors, or meteor, I don't know, pellets, whatever, striking the earth and causing a devastating flood.
Yes.
Which is funny because I've seen academics unironically argue for views like that in interpreting things like the Bale cycle and stating, oh, well, this might be based off of an ancient meteor or a comet having struck the ocean and leaving behind like a trail of smoke, and that's where we get the serpent symbolism from. And I thought that was stupid, but
Yeah,
that's
a very
that's a
classic euhemerism.
yeah, oh yeah,
Yeah. To recap our arguments at speed, as I said, we did an entire lecture. I don't feel like doing another 2-hour lecture on the spot. But to recap our argument at speed, and by our argument I mean outside of one or two things that are my express view, most of what we said is just non-controversial and accepted in religious studies, because it's kind of obviously true. The Chaoskampf motif is maybe not global in the sense that everyone believes it, but certainly international in the sense that you can find it almost anywhere.
yeah,
Motif involving a primordial battle between the storm god or the creator god or sometimes the sun god and the serpent of chaos, which ends with either the killing of the serpent or sometimes the taming of the serpent, or sometimes the killing and then resurrection of the serpent and then its taming. And is I want to say it's a symbolic device or symbolic myth encapsulating the creation of order out of chaos, or the ordering of chaos, maybe another way to put it.
yeah. Hence the term Chaoskampf, which is
chaos
German
war.
Which is German for to struggle with chaos.
Yeah, to struggle with chaos.
Yeah.
As in everyone's favorite 20th century dictator's somewhat edgy memoir, My Struggle.
My Struggle, yes.
My Struggle, yes. Nobody appreciated my artistic talents. Sorry.
Moustache Man's Chaoskampf. Yep.
Yes, Moustache Man's Chaoskampf.
That's just World War II. We'll call that word.
Yes. Is a Hellenist joke in there? No. So back on target. Keep political philosophy out of this too much. But yeah, motif, ordering of the world out of chaos. Very important if you want to understand a lot of ancient myth. And B, if you want to have views on order that aren't just like the destruction, the stultifying imposition of some hardline, I want to say like totalitarian regimentation of all reality. You'll notice a lot of media is this really weird, almost reverse Chaoskampf, where the forces of order want to imprison everything and make everything bland and boring. And the forces of chaos are off destroying it because they know it'll cause havoc and darkness everywhere, but then it can lead people to like do stuff. If you correctly understand the Chaoskampf motif, you understand why this modern narrative is just full of bunk, because it totally misunderstands what it means to live an ordered life, which is not in fact to be anti-chaos, but rather to rectify chaos. But yes, the serpent is always a figure in that story. Sometimes it's not the god; it's a human being acting as a sort of stand-in. This is like the quintessential hero narrative, right?
Yeah.
Beowulf goes and fights the dragon. Right? What's Beowulf doing? Beowulf he's imposing the kingly order or the divine order upon the wilds of monsters. Right? And Beowulf he dies. Spoiler at the end of that, but his successor defeats the monster and establishes the kingly royal line. You find this with a lot of European or British dragon slaying stories, which is why the folklorist Jacqueline Simpson, who doesn't seem to know about the Chaoskampf motif, but does know a lot about dragons, wrongly concludes that dragon narratives are political devices of control. She's getting it backwards. It's not the politics of control. It's the act of ordering, which is just as much an act by man as it is an act by the gods. You have Asclepius, you got Hercules, you got the Chinese hero who fought the dragon Gong Gong. You got God fighting Leviathans. I can go on and on and on. There's no reason to think it's a comet because we have very, very extensive evidence of what people were using these myths for. So, like, what is the liturgical or the ritual or the pragmatic function of these stories? Like, if I'm looking at a given community retelling this story, why are they retelling it? And it's always the Chaoskampf motif. It always has something to do with the creation of order out of chaos. I have never seen it. I won't say I've never seen it connect into meteorites, but in like one or two cases where I have, that was because of additional beliefs about the perils of like meteorites. Though that being said, the Tsimtsumini of the Aztecs, they were spiders, yes, not snakes.
I don't recall.
Yeah, they were the Aztec star demons. That would be the I think I want to say they were spiders. I want to say the Tsimtsumini were spiders. Also, though they were stars. They were skeletons. I take it back. I mean, they were stars, but they were fundamentally skeletons, depicted as skeletons. Which doesn't necessarily mean they also weren't depicted as serpents. But yeah, I can't. Where are we at in our discussion here?
Chaoskampf.
Yes, chaos. Oh yeah, Chaoskampf motif. Yeah, he's not getting it, and this leads him to wrongly conclude that it must be a reference to a comet. It is, as far as I'm concerned, certainly not a comet. But I think his mistake here is, as I said, it's just he's operating at an amateur level when it comes to, say, symbolic hermeneutics. And I'm not saying this super critically, because like it's not like none of the archaeologists I've seen critique him have been able to articulate this better either.
No, they've all been terrible debunkings.
Yeah. In fact, you even see this in the TV show where they're trying to keep him out of the Serpent Mound. And he's like, I'm just going to read the letter they sent me, which I found really rather rude. He's reading this letter to them, or that they sent him, and they're trying to keep him out. And then it turns out that the main objection they have to his interpretation of Serpent Mound is that Serpent Mound is astronomically oriented facing the sun. And I'm head desking because that's probably the least controversial thing Graham Hancock has ever said. And they're saying, this isn't true. This is nothing you're just wrong. And we want to preserve Serpent Mound to be a place of truth. That they would design a serpent and point it towards the chaos, like the sun. The other figure of the Chaoskampf story is, to my mind, exceptionally non-controversial. Because that's just consonant with what we see everywhere else. Which doesn't mean I think it's a 15,000-year-old remembrance of comets or whatever. I just think that means that people might have pointed a snake at the sun. Which is cool, but not necessarily earth-shattering. Do you think this is a good place to step into astronomy?
Sure.
Yeah, so we had big, I don't know what your views were on his use of astrology and astronomy, or astrology and astronomy. Anything you want to say there before I launch into more rants?
No,
or
it's
discussions.
Fine. It's fine. Ranting.
Yeah, so he interviews a number of people involved in archaeoastronomy. In my experience, archaeoastronomy is an amazing example of the tendency of people in general and of people with scientists or scientific pretensions to latch onto one feature of a thing and treat the thing itself as causally related to that feature, rather than accepting that there might be multiple causes active in or pertaining to the thing. So to give a concrete example here, like a lot of proponents of archaeoastronomy argue that a given temple is astronomically oriented in one way or another, either to the eclipses or to the phases of the moon or to a specific star, and then they conclude that the temple exists for the purpose of tracking that as basically a giant clock. Right. And my issue with this is not that I think there's no astronomical features in temples, because do you still see a lot of archaeologists defending that one? I know the claim that the no temples that are astronomical significance was big in the 60s and 70s, but it's been pretty conclusively falsified since then, so.
I mean, I haven't. I think a lot of people do think there's astronomical significance.
Okay, that's good to know, because I know it used to be a very big, like, there's no evidence of this is all just weirdos, and then this group of individuals were able to successfully use all of the temples in Britain to track the solar and lunar sequences of the year, and they were like, well, crap, turns out you can. Martin Brennan's The Stones of Time, lovely book, a very cool book. So the more controversial contention, of course, is that therefore the temple exists for that purpose, when actually it's simply that temples are ritual, like it's a ritual location. It exists to fulfill a ritual function. This isn't true of all temples. For instance, Sikh Gurudwaras are abnormally divorced from time. I was really surprised to find that out. They were, when I've interviewed a few, they were very proud to tell me they do not hold regular services. Which is certainly, I won't say unique, but a little idiosyncratic. But typically a temple, like their ritual locations, they serve a ritual function. And if there's astronomical elements, that's because either the astronomical feature is deeply important, or because there's something about the positioning of the feature that's important to the timing of the ritual. Right. So why do a lot of druid monuments? Why do a lot of British and Irish and Gaelic monuments? A lot of them are pre-Druidic. Some of them probably are Druidic, but a lot of them are pre-Druidic. Why do a lot of them trace the sun and moon? It's probably because they were A, performing rites at very specific times of the year along the passage of the sun and the moon, and B, because the sun and the moon may have been hugely significant to those rites, not in terms of like some primitive scientific astronomy, but in terms of the divinities of those planets. Classical planets, sorry. The sun and moon are planets in ancient astrology. This is pretty non-controversial when you get to a lot of Eastern temples, for instance. And I suspect it'll be borne out as continuing research goes on in a lot of the Americas. Which also means that some of the temples Hancock looks at, we just have to acknowledge we have no idea why they are astronomically oriented the way they are. Right. Serpent bound.
For him, he thinks everything has to function as like a time capsule, commemorating the flood and the disaster.
And that is, unfortunately, we know that is false.
Yes.
Because we have many temples which do have astrological functions that have nothing to do with primordial catastrophes.
Yeah.
So yeah, sorry to break it, but it just in terms of like Serpent Mound, I think we can make a pretty good guess based on everything else we know about serpents, that it's pointing at the sun because it has something to do with a local Chaoskampf motif, which we tragically no longer possess. Some of the other... What were some of the ones where it was pointed at the dog star?
Was that the temple at Malta?
I think it was Malta, yeah. Yeah, we have no idea why, and we'll just, unless we somehow luck out and trip over a decipherable cache of ancient records from this lost civilization, we will just never know why they wanted their temple to point to the dog star. Right? Did it have something to do with timing? Is it that they think the dog star is some sort of divinity? For instance, the Greeks thought the Big Dipper was... what was the name of the bear goddess? Wasn't Calliope.
Arctis or something?
No,
Is that the Latin name?
oh, I knew that... This is... Sorry, it just flew out of my mind. It's the myth of Lycaon. Do you remember? Hold up. Hold up. Sorry, I'm going to look it up real quick. Callisto. Calliope. Oi. According to Greek, Callisto became the Big Dipper in the heavens, and the reason the Big Dipper never sets, because the Big Dipper spins in a circle over the course of the year from the perspective of those of us on the Earth, is because Hera was incensed at Calliope for sleeping with Zeus. And she wanted to punish the poor woman, even though the woman never consented to sleep with Zeus, which is a very important part of the story, because the rest of the myth is Zeus's fight with her very angry family. But that aside, more wonderful Zeus stories. The same star, so the pole star is in the Big Dipper. I'm probably going to find out. The pole star is in the Big Dipper, yeah. It's these are all things you know, and then you say them on a stream, and you're like, "Wait, crap!" Yeah.
I don't know anything about astronomy, so I can't. Don't look.
I'm not the best, except as it bears on religion. Sorry, I'm looking. I was looking it up, and it's like, yeah. It's the pole star's in the Big Dipper. It's the North Star. I knew that because the Big Dipper is right. Sorry, for those of us in the Northern Hemisphere, I know very, very little about the Southern Hemisphere's starry sky. I'm sorry, but for those of us in the Northern Hemisphere, the North Star is always at north, right? This is why if you're lost in the woods, you follow the North Star. And that's because the constellation that's heading out from it, the Big Dipper, or that's not because the Big Dipper goes in a circle, but the Big Dipper goes in a circle around the North Star, which is its tail end. The Big Dipper, yes. In China, the North, and more specifically in Taoism, the North Star is a totally different divinity. It was believed to be by early Taoists, so this is not going to be necessarily true for... I think it still is true for some modern Taoist groups, but Taoism's a very variegated religion with a lot of different sects and different theologies. Early Taoism understood the North Star as being either the supreme being or the incarnation of the supreme being, and the reason why you'll encounter a lot of prayers to the North Star or to the Big Dipper in early Taoist scriptures is because it sort of symbolizes the head in Taoist sacral body arts, because it's at the head of the earth, right? And then the rest of your sort of sacred body builds down from that. As it were, which is why you'll notice there's a North Star head in Taoist, early Taoist spiritual physiognomy. So these are two well-documented examples, right, with two totally different theologies. Right. I know of, barring one exception, like Daniel Ogden records a highly controversial. He doesn't even believe it himself, but he records a highly controversial hot take that there were female-only bear cults dedicated to Callisto in northern Greece. Other than that one modern hot take, we are not going to find similar bear theologies in Greece centered around the Big Dipper. We do find bear theologies elsewhere in Europe. I know the Celts were big bear worshippers, even if we're not entirely sure about what was going on there, as were the Slavs. But the Greeks are not big bear worshippers, and I have not seen anything or I haven't seen too much on the North Star in Greek religion. Right, so you really cannot reach many conclusions about astronomical symbolism or astrological symbolism, which Hancock isn't dealing with as explicitly because he tends to gloss over it. But yeah, like a lot of these temples, I just think, I hate to say it, I just think we have to shrug our hands. And then sometimes we can make good guesses. But they are still guesses. Maybe one day we will find the cache at Serpent Mound, and we will discover that the reason it's oriented to the sun is because the natives of the area thought the sun was the serpent's giant egg, and the apocalypse would start when the egg hatched. Right. I know of no instance where a mythology said that, but that doesn't mean no mythology might say that. Just best inference with our current evidence. But yeah, same issue. I had that issue with his sort of views of the heavens very consistently. I also think he's reading too much precision, when he's trying to track the exact positioning of the sun relative to the snake at Serpent Mound. Do you remember that,
Yeah, oh yeah.
Yes.
Well, he's trying to make an argument that when Serpent Mound may have been constructed, that it was constructed in alignment with the sun when it was, I guess, when the Earth, like all the way back then, like 1,200 years ago.
12,000.
Hence why it's 12,000. Sorry. Hence why its precise alignment is a bit off kilter, because the Earth wasn't in the same position then.
Yeah.
But to me, it's a brilliant. It's kind of brilliant, but also,
Yeah, it's not that I don't think the natives would have been capable of that sort of precision. I don't think people cared that much if their goal was just to point out the sun. I think they would have been content if it was in the generally correct direction, right?
Yeah.
And that's not a mean argument, because like a lot of people build temples facing the east, right? And especially facing Jerusalem. Nowadays, they are not making sure they are on a perfect geometrical plane with Jerusalem. They are just building it in the general direction, so that when you pray facing Jerusalem.
Mm-hmm.
But obviously, you're probably off by 300 miles. But it's the thought that counts. It's absolutely the thought that counts with those sorts of temples. But yeah, we covered. Oh yeah, we've actually covered it a lot so far. We have not talked about his views on mountains, or my issues with his views on technology.
Well,
on
mountains, I guess on the topic of pyramids, I'm in agreement with him that the typical academic argument for why pyramids exist, oh well, it's just easy to build, is just nonsense.
Yeah, that's
a meme argument, actually.
That's unfortunate. Like, it's like, I know I mentioned at the start, I don't think archaeology's really a science. I don't think this isn't because I have idealized views on what a science is. I just think it's failing to meet very basic criteria right now. But it's genuinely irksome to me that he's getting into an argument with people about something that any other discipline could have told archaeologists is full of shit, if you'll pardon my French. Like, we know why people build temples in the shapes of mountains. It's to, if you'll pardon my French, symbolize the fact that they're fucking mountains. That's why they're there. They are building symbolic mountains in miniature. And Hancock admits this in season 2. I don't think he really sort of draws the correct conclusions.
No.
But so there was another place where I said he did that, and then orality. We'll have to deal with orality again later. Sorry, I was like, said that twice. But like mountain. They don't build mountain-shaped temples because they're easy. Like a lot of the temples he looked at, the architectural feat involved in constructing these, whatever shape you build them in, is simply insane.
Yeah.
Like the Great Pyramid of, except if you think the Great Pyramid of Cholula was built by human hands, and everyone does, including Hancock, I think.
Yeah.
He just thinks it was built with technology from the heavens, but it was still humans doing the building, even if they had better technology. Sorry. If you accept that the Great Cholula was built, that is an absolutely massive architectural undertaking of colossal size, absolutely colossal size, that would have in no way be mitigated by choosing to build it as a pyramid. Like, that certainly makes it easier than trying to build the same size structure as, like, a temple or a sphere. But it by no means makes it easier. I think he's absolutely correct that the academic explanation just fails. It's just unfortunate that, like, that could be solved by looking outside of archaeology. Right? It is a mountain. They are meant to symbol, like the cosmic mountain, which both symbolizes all of creation and acts as a bridge between heaven and earth.
Yeah, it's the mountain of the gods.
Mountain of the gods, yeah. Like, that is why these things are built in pyramid shapes. Yes.
Yeah. And yeah, there is a connection actually between the Egyptian pyramids, the Aztec pyramids, ziggurats, and probably every other pyramidal structure on Earth.
Yes.
But it's not necessarily because of Atlantis, which is sort of the causal route he's trying to push for here. But it's actually because of a shared metaphysical worldview.
Yes. And you can also see this with a lot of people who did not build pyramid-shaped temples because they had an actual mountain they could go to. Like, such as the Japanese, for instance. And the Chinese, like, you find the exact same symbolic complex in China, and in Japan, and in Israel, with the Jews. In Israel.
Mount Zion, yeah.
Yes, Mount Zion. Oh, a few mountains, eh?
Yeah, oh yeah.
A few mountains. And in Christianity, like, Jesus gets crucified on a mountain. Yep. That's not an unimportant feature of the crucifixion myth. Even if you think it's real, like, if you think it's real, Jesus picked every element of that from heaven, planned it out, right? For a reason, to communicate a message to his adherents and to act as the way, the truth, the life, right? In fact, the Book of Revelations even incorporates that sort of cosmic mountain, cosmic tree symbolism into the act of the crucifixion.
Yes.
So, yeah, like, this was something that the early church knew. You find it in Europe again, but these are all places with mountains, right? You don't find it in Egypt. Why? Because I shouldn't say they don't have mountains. They do.
They do have sacred mountains, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
They're the gateways to the Duat.
Oh, yes. Sorry, my bad. They were on the other side, yeah.
And the pyramids in question actually represent the primordial mound, too. So you have also that mound symbolism, which is interchangeable with mountains. There are a few native myths that also call or make reference to the mound as being the place where the gods descend. So yeah, mountains, mounds, like sacred landscape theology.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
and the artificial mountain, actually, it's what makes the mount of the gods, the dwelling place of the gods, accessible to humans. Because mountains are still kind of out of the way, and you still have to, trek, up there, and it's like,
Well, even
well, that,
today, think of how
yeah,
many people die
yeah,
mountaineering.
yeah, exactly. So, um, that was the original function of the ziggurat, for example, right? It was to make the gods more accessible through this artificial construct.
Yes.
Which actually, I'm kind of diverging, but that view actually that has an impact on the way you read the Tower of Babel.
Oh
Is
no, absolutely. Yeah.
yeah, forcefully drawing God to yourself in a way,
Yeah.
but almost like an idol. But yeah,
Well, I actually was going to get into that because I think you can sort of connect the ziggurats to the flood.
yeah,
Um, in terms of so for those of you like Hancock relies very heavily on flood myths, right?
yes,
I think anyone watching this who knows anything about Hancock should know that. So you guys will know then that the Sumerians had their own flood myth tradition, just like the Jews do. But if you look at the different arcs, like the instructions for building an ark, the Sumerian ark is shaped like a ziggurat. The biblical ark is shaped like a cube or a rectangle.
no, that's wrong.
It's wasn't
No,
it
Irving Finkel gets into the biblical flood is shaped like a coracle.
coracle? Thank you.
Yes, and
But it
it
does
is
still parallel that temple symbolism.
yes, oh yes, very
Yes.
much so. But
Sorry, I got it wrong there.
yeah, it is drawing on some Sumerian ideas of the coracle as well. There are versions that do depict it as a temple, yes, but it's
Yeah,
yes,
yeah, yeah. I'm not saying there's no core. I'm just saying it's like the Sumerian version is very clearly using a Sumerian temple. The biblical version is very clearly drawing on biblical temple imagery. And there's for those of you who are religious and accept the Holy Scriptures, there are very definite theological reasons for that correspondence and construction. And in a Sumerian context too, like they drew definite conclude. There were reasons they had the Ziusudra in a ziggurat shaped arc floating around, and those reasons are slightly different from the biblical account, as we just noted when you went into the Tower of Babel, but do sort of a shared background, different sort of maybe different commentaries on reality is a good way to think about it. My citation here is Michael Morales, Who Shall Ascend the Mountain of the Lord for the Ark Temple Tabernacle. Very much a Christian interpretation. I mean, it's a work of Christian theology, but Irving Finkel basically vets its conclusions, and that was Chaos or Ryan's citation. Right.
yeah.
That was all right. And that was it. So yeah. Which it is funny because there actually is links between temples and the floods, just not the one. And between Chaoskampf motifs and the floods too, because those floods are usually associated with the waters of chaos, i.e. the serpent. They're just not the motifs Hancock thinks they are.
Yeah.
And and you see this again with a lot of like he notes in his discussion of the Great Pyramid of Cholula that a lot of these monuments are built around sacred springs and caverns, but he doesn't really. I don't say he doesn't explore the symbolism. He might in his books. He only briefly touches on the symbolism of mountains in season 2. Caves also have very definite near global symbolism. Springs are a little more different. They tend to vary. There's some very consistent features, of course, because it's the waters of life. That's on the but obvious end, but then they often have regional meanings too. But all of those are going to have an impact on each specific culture's or religion's or individual's choice to consecrate a specific temple. So yeah, that's about that for. We talked about mountains. I mentioned orality. Do you want to double back to that now, or talk about something else?
We can do orality if you want.
Just because
Yeah.
or or was there something you thought we could more organically? We could go back to orality. We can go because I brought it up. I brought Hancock. I will give him credit here. He is far, far, far better than most archaeologists at paying attention to oral traditions.
Yes.
I find a lot of archaeologists are still in ridiculous minimalist mode when it comes to oral traditions. They're like, it's all false, bro. It's all false. It's made up. I see Hobsbawm cited a lot by a lot of archaeologists. They don't. Some are better than others, but a lot of them just do not seem to care. I won't say it's industry-wide, of course, but as I said, I've seen a lot who just do not seem to care about orality. Hancock does, in what I consider, like, over the last century, there have been a series of exceedingly colossal discoveries which have validated that, yes, oral knowledge is generally fairly reliable. Yes, it is often, it's maybe not so ancient you can get 9,000 years out of it. I think that's certainly stretching the point. With respect to apologies to Hancock, but it is a great deal more reliable than people thought it was in the 19th century and early 20th. And then Hobsbawm thought it was when he wrote his famous book. We were able to successfully prove, for instance, that the Maori oral histories are generally reliable. The specifics, of course, will always elude us because we can never prove specific people or specific narratives, right? It's like, this guy's ship came this year. It's like, well, that's just unprovable because we have no written records, right? But we were able to prove that the Maori histories, in the main, are correct about when they arrived on the islands and how they settled them. We were able to prove a great deal of the Iliad being... the Iliad's detailing, but also the recital of the Iliad over centuries was largely accurate. I think the discovery of Troy really ought to have sandwiched a lot of that one. I still see revisionist views in academia, and it blows my mind, because it's like, we know the Iliad was an oral text for, what would you say, between 600 and 1,100 years?
I mean, Homer, well, yeah, Homer
down in
lived
the
8th
3rd century. Yeah. It's
Yeah,
about 600 years.
yeah.
But it contains oral features of the then lost Mycenaean civilization, which means Homer had access to reliable oral knowledge going back, another 600 years?
Yeah.
400, 600 years. There are very definite survivals of Mycenaean armored culture in there, or military technology that Homer would not have known about at his lifetime. And then the Iliad generally gets passed on. There are certainly changes in, many of which we probably don't remember, will never know about, but it does get passed on pretty reliably until the 3rd century, when it's written down by the librarians of Alexandria, which was, for the record, the main reason the Library of Alexandria existed. A lot of internet atheists seem convinced it was like a scientific repository. It certainly had that. Its main function was literary criticism. Like, most of the famous scholars associated with the Library of Alexandria were like poets and philologists. Which isn't to disparage any of their work, just to say it's not what some people want it to have been. But that aside, back to the point. I can name several other very major milestones in the study of orality. Outside of archaeology, you will find a lot of people tend to be very accepting of oral tradition in academia. We have pretty good evidence that a lot of the folk tales recorded by the Brothers Grimm probably go back to the Proto-Indo-Europeans. There was a major study demonstrating that just a couple years ago. I could go on and name far more examples. I won't. I'll cut it short here just to keep. So Hancock is very much, maybe not with archaeology, but he is in line with other disciplines when he talks about the myths are far more reliable than people think. But he also seems to be, to my mind, how do I put this in a how would you put this in a polite way? I want to say dismissive of some of the nuances. Or maybe inattentive. Is that maybe a polite way of phrasing it? Inattentive to some of the nuances. Yeah, inattentive to some of the nuances of what oral transmission and oral recitation or even oral knowledge actually sort of entails and why people have it. Mainly in terms of what it is. So actually, this is connected to another major critique of I think probably my biggest issue with Hancock. Actually, orality, properly speaking, entails a completely different basis to the society than, say, a more purely written one such as ours. This isn't to say orality and literacy are in conflict. That's a debunked thesis. But if we're talking about a purely oral society, we are talking about a society that has some differences in terms of the way our society, which is hyper-focused on written information, especially over the internet, right? Categorizes and stores info. Not insurmountable differences, just the sort of thing you'd want to be wary of when doing basic interpretation work. And this is Hancock. I mentioned earlier, I think a lot of his problems are he's thinking like an archaeologist. And a lot of the errors Hancock makes are very ironically because he's operating in archaeology. And if he had taken maybe 10 years to consider the world from the perspective of different disciplines, such as, say, religious philosophy or metaphysics, some of his conclusions would differ. Hancock accepts the thesis common in older types of archaeology. I want to say it's been abandoned. The sort of uniform technological advancement thesis. I want to say I'd like to say it's been abandoned, but that might be me expecting too much out of archaeologists. Earlier theorists tended to assume the technology was uniform, both in the what you call it, the horizontal sense that across a society, technological advancement is consistent, right? Which means that if a society advances, it advances bigger, and uniform vertically in the sense that societies go from low tech to high tech. Right. And this advancement, as I said, you'll start at low tech and then you develop on. And you keep seeing this, every time Hancock looks at a giant monolith, he says, but how could hunter-gatherers have built this? Because they would have needed all these other technologies. And this is just not true. Right? It is entirely possible for an oral society, for any society, to have certain technologies but not other technologies. And it is especially possible for this to be true of oral societies, where the rest of their technology may be encoded in the spoken language, and it dies with them. Right, like Greek engineering, for instance, was much more advanced than a lot of people would think. But the reason it never blossomed into a scientific revolution in the way some people think it should have, the famous, the famous progress of science chart?
Oh, yeah.
Memed on, yeah, it's like scientific progress growing up, and it's like, and then Christianity appears, and it's, anyway. Greece would never have developed a scientific revolution, not because they weren't intelligent people, not because they didn't have all sorts of amazing inventions, including a pretty early steam-powered engine, but because engineers were operated in highly secret societies where information was passed down through secret and insidious methods in, like, backroom deals. And what really facilitated the expansion of science was not that we suddenly developed science. It was that we were willing to share that info and publish that info and spread that info around so that other people... Yeah, but Tui comments, you mean that all people groups don't all follow the same tech tree as Civ 6? Yeah, precisely. There was a major archaeological discovery, which was what, 3-4 years ago? Of copper mines in Israel that would have been run by ancient Israelites during the judicial period, the period of the Book of the Judges, based on dating. And this, I don't want to say it was earth-shattering, but this was, at the time of the Book of Judges, Israel was pastoralist. Right, the Jewish people, the Israelites, they had habitations, but they moved frequently. And then it's only later that they start to settle down and start building more permanent cities. There were permanent cities, but they weren't sort of everywhere in the same way that they were during the Davidic period. And the discovery of mining operations was basically huge because it demonstrated that, yes, there was a pastoral people active in Israel at this time, probably the Jews, or the ancient Israelites, sorry, off doing their mining operations, which also means that we are now very much handicapped in what we might be able to say about this period archaeologically, because pastoral peoples leave poor refuse. Right? They don't have giant cities in the way that we do, and so they, not to say they're not going to leave any archaeological remnants, but they're not going to leave as many, and it's much harder to track them because they're not all in one spot in the way that a city is all in one spot. And to extend this parallel, for instance, like Göbekli, modern archaeologists think Göbekli Tepe was built by hunter-gatherers, and then they started farming. I'd read papers years ago that the main thing they were farming was alcohol, or the stuff used for alcohol. I don't know if that conclusion is still current. That's about an 8-year-old paper, so it could easily. But 8 years ago, I know that they were arguing that Göbekli Tepe they discovered agriculture for the purposes of creating alcohol for probably either religious rites or festivals, or both, or some other third reason. Hancock is like, this is implausible, though. He's like, unless the information was implanted, and the information isn't implausible. It's not implausible, because it is entirely within the realm of possibility that a hunter-gathering society did possess the knowledge needed to install major architectural features. Again, I mentioned the mines in Israel. The Mongol Empire did a lot of this too, right? They went around, they would build giant cities whenever they needed to, usually by subcontracting the work out, and then they would return to living in a bunch of tents. Right. There are other examples in Africa of places like people building monolithic cities for trade. For instance, there are ongoing as of a few years ago, there were ongoing arguments about some of the megalithic cities in what is now Great Zimbabwe, including Great Zimbabwe, the city after which Great Zimbabwe is named. And one of the most plausible interpretations was that these cities were built as trading nexuses between the local tribes and traders from the land of Punt in what is probably, but not certainly, modern Somalia. These would have been oral societies. The architectural or engineering knowledge would have been passed down. Actually, Hancock's right when he says shamans there. Because in this case, it would have been passed down through the shamanistic class. Very likely, sorry. We can't say that for certain, but based on what we know elsewhere, that is the probable answer. The druids of ancient... And I mean the actual druids here, not like the druids of some weird fantasy novel, were the same, right? They were the religious priests of the Celts, and they also were the astronomers and the engineers.
And the lawmakers. They were the
And the lawmakers.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, they were the intelligentsia.
Yeah. They were the intelligentsia.
Yeah.
Wizard, just famous, obviously, that wizard just means wise man, right?
Yeah, and they were also said to do magic.
Yes, they were said to do magic. With that being said, the Celt, as far as I'm aware, it is still accepted knowledge that the Celts were mostly, if not all but exclusively, oral. I know there's some argument for written scripts, but the extent
following the Ogham script in the 4th century. The development of that, yeah.
AD?
AD, yes.
Yes, so yeah, that's going to be pretty late. But yeah, mostly oral. And yet the Romans tell us they were amazing engineers. Right. Except given that that's pretty high praise from the people who built roads that still exist today, as I said, I do think, like, he's assuming a uniformity of technology. That, as I said, this was a very common thesis in the first few decades of the last century, and you still tend to see it associated in people's minds. I'm not saying this too critically. Sorry, but he is making that sort of inference very routinely, and that inference is unfortunately false. One of the features of oral societies is they absolutely do allow you to preserve that kind of information. And we can even sometimes with societies where orality and literacy coexist side by side, we can even name specific individuals, right? Thomas Aquinas wrote his entire commentary. He wrote a very famous collection of, like, the Church Fathers on the Bible, which just collects all the teachings of all the Church Fathers and lists them out, right? And he wrote it all off the top of his head. He did not have access to the monastery library at the time, so he had to write the entire commentary off the top of his head. The late Rav Chaim Kanievsky, the late head of Haredi Jewry, who passed on about 3 years ago, was legendarily able to note, like, somebody asked him if the Tosafot ever mentioned Maimonides, to which he said yes, but only in 3 instances, one of them implicit, and then proceeded to name all 3 instances. Right. Why do I mention this? The Tosafot is a commentary or commentators on the Talmud. The Talmud is 83 volumes long. It's almost 2 million words in Aramaic, which is an exceptionally succinct language. The Tosafot they're not quite that long, but it's a commentary on all 83 volumes. And in under 10 seconds, this man was able to sort through 166 volumes worth of literature and correctly draw out the same 3 references. Just off the top. So there absolutely are people, so one of them in our lifetime, who are capable of these kinds of feats, and no reason to think that this is not true in ancient civilizations. I just bring this up because, like, again, there has not yet been evidence of writing in the Amazon. I won't say I have no expectations as to what they will or won't find there. And yet we see that this, whatever civilization was in the Amazon, they were able to engage in monumental architectural feats at a continental scale, like across what now 6 countries. So like Brazil, I want to say parts of Peru, parts of Bolivia, parts of Colombia, parts of Ecuador and Venezuela. Just absolutely massive, massive architectural project. Probably orally. They probably did it orally, which is mind-boggling. Like mind-boggling and insanely impressive, and allows us to infer against alternative hypotheses involving Atlanteans. But yeah, we've been. That was, as I said, that to me that was my biggest issue. Actually, I just think much of his argument just collapses if you just accept this a multi-causal approach to advances in technology, which we can even see today. Like you will run into a lot of people who are willing, or groups who are willing to use some technologies but draw the line at others. Right, the Mennonites, the Amish, Jews, Orthodox Jews. Sorry. Like they will use, a lot of Orthodox Jewish groups will use cell phones but not allow TV. And some groups will not use cell phones, they'll only use like rotary phones. And there's always definite religious reasons for this, and not bad ones. Like a lot of them are very good. I mean, they're different priorities from those of us who aren't Orthodox Jews, but contextually they absolutely make sense. Or you'll have monasteries that install power lines but not air conditioning, right? Because power lines help with elements of the religious life, whereas air conditioning is just a luxury. And so on and so forth and such like. In terms of the positive, actually, aspects of Hancock's work, I do think a good awareness, like turning again to the Amazonian civilization that he talked about very extensively in season 2. If we want to talk about like what can you actually learn from watching, and I do think for anyone listening to this who has not seen it, I absolutely recommend this TV show. Right, you will learn. You will not be convinced of spacefaring Atlanteans and giant meteorites, but you will learn a lot. You will learn, and what you will learn is not just fascinating historical facts, but stuff that is potentially deeply relevant to our own lives, right? Because he circumscribes, and even if he doesn't quite know what he's talking about, he does correctly circumscribe a civilization that was able to pull off immense feats of like bioengineering while having a positive impact on the landscape. Like they built the Amazon rainforest as we know it today. I won't say it's constructed because I hate that phrase. It was constructed, but they, over the course of hundreds of years and the effort of millions of individuals, they were able to pull off this amazing feat using just nothing but oral knowledge. Like they had no college of technicians. They had no, actually, I shouldn't say they had no college. For all I know, they did have the ancient Amazonian equivalent of a college, but actually, they probably did because there are shamanic schools. But that aside. Yeah. They had none of our resources. They had none of our ability to transmit knowledge. In like anyone listening to this, you're all but not in the same city as me. You may not even be in the same continent as me, and yet I am transmitting this information to you instantaneously. And yet this civilization was able to pull off this immense feat of bioengineering that did nothing but good for everyone, right? Like it helped out them. It helped out all the humans who came after them because they evolved. They created a lot of the edible plant species we use today, and they did it all without harming the animals that actually live there. Like one of the studies I mentioned noted that they were even making entryways for the giant sloths.
Well, that's nice.
Yeah, it's nice. And you can, like, this isn't just historically interesting. This is for those of us living in our world with all of its problems. You can learn a lot from this. You can genuinely learn a lot about how to live, how to like, how to use technology, like how to pass on information, how to take care of the planet, and what like the actual feats human beings are realistically capable of. Like if somebody had told me, 10 years ago or whatever, that a whole bunch of illiterate people with very few tools were capable of terraforming half a continent, just given sheer force of will, I would have stared him in the eye and raised an eyebrow and started laughing, right? And yet it's just true. It is just, and as far as I can see, it's just settled science. Like having looked into this separately, it's just mind blowing. So as I said, I do recommend the show for that reason. I think Hancock missed this because of his. Well, he didn't actually. He did not miss this because he does talk very, very extensively about the climate crisis. So Hancock is absolutely 100% keyed into this. I just don't think he realizes what a truly impressive statement it ultimately means for us, like our world.
Yeah.
Or maybe I shouldn't say that because he'll probably do a third season, and maybe like a year or two from now I'll be watching it and it'll be like, and with just oral knowledge they were able, and I'll be like, oh wow. Maybe he is more keyed in, and he just didn't say that in the TV show. But yeah, like that to me was almost a bit of a shame in terms of the TV show itself. But I do recommend very much that everyone listening watch this show, just for that. Like, not because I think there's ancient alien civilizations.
Well, again, Atlantis.
Sorry, not because I think Atlantis is going around or that aliens communed with man. Sorry, yes, thank you for catching me there. But just because of what you're going to learn, it was just mind blowing. And you can, because he does give you the names, you can cross reference. And many of the papers are in English. I mentioned two were Parsonen and Arajo, Angela Arajo, and I want to say Maddie Parsonen. But yeah, it's unfortunate that I think he just. I was like, it's really, you were really on point when you said amateur, eh?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Because
actually, like he did create or bring you, like I think he like his what he presents is more scientifically useful than I think people realize. But because everyone gets caught up on the whole Atlantis angle, it's like, I must froth at the mouth. I must react. I must defend science. It's like, calm down. Like, take a chill pill.
No, yeah, like there were definitely some obvious howlers in there.
Oh yeah.
I shared one earlier. I thought the Piri race map argument was, or Piri Reus or whatever, was just ridiculous. No, having read quite a few ancient maps, I can state and studied a little about how they were produced, because I read a few books on sea monsters. I know this sounds like a weird diversion, but in order to talk about sea monsters, you have to talk about cartography, right? Because most of our records of sea monsters are in ancient sea maps, which means, and this is one of the funnier things, is like studying supernatural creatures, you actually end up just having to study, to do it well, you actually end up having to study a lot of other stuff. Like how they gardened in late antiquity. Or English festival laws in its theological context. So you had to study map making, and I can state very confidently that I have no idea why the Peri-Reus map curves down the way it does, but that ain't Antarctica. They were 100% not aware of Antarctica, and certainly not Antarctica 11,600 years ago. That is, at best, a highly bizarre coincidence. But some of what he did say was, as to my mind, pretty non-controversial. As I said, I brought up the serpent mound example. I think Bimini Road is human. I don't think it's Atlantean. I think it is human. It's probably not a road, but I think it is human. And then a lot of what he also said is stuff that's maybe like he adds on his little "what if it's 11,000 years old" shtick, but like the stuff about Dorinkuyu, for instance, absolutely fascinating. Absolutely. And none of the stuff about Göbekli Tepe was all that controversial either. We
I'm
know
more
it.
interested in some. I'm really interested in the symbolism of Göbekli Tepe.
Yes.
Like really, really fascinating. And Kara, like all the Tastepeller, I think it's called, all the sites that you see there, the Karahan Tepe, all of it. Really, like he actually brought up an example of like robed individuals being carved on some of the monuments, and it's like, what's that about?
Yeah.
I want to know more about those guys.
Yes. Yeah, probably not the sky fares or whatever. No, I thought they were the Atlanteans. My bad.
Yeah.
But yeah, like the stars, the robed figures, the animals. Yeah, Göbekli, absolutely fascinating. Very, I want to say, like what is going on. For those who don't know, Göbekli Tepe is was it 12,000 years old to 14,000 to 12,000? I think it was inhabited, approximately. Feel free to double check my dates here because I'm really bad with numbers. But 14,000 to 12,000 year old, approximately, stone city in the middle of southern Turkey, just north of modern Syria. It's part of. There's a couple dozen similar locations, eh?
Oh yeah. Well, it's part of a bigger.
Yeah, the
Bigger
Tashtepler
culture.
sites.
The Tashtepler, yeah.
Yeah, I can't remember the exact number of. I think it's a couple. There's a dozen or a couple dozen. Similar cities. They're all megalithic, and yet one of the things I can't remember if Hancock gets into it. There's no evidence of habitation.
He didn't bring. I think there is, because we found bones. We found
I
little
thought those
plates.
bones were human sacrifices.
No, we like animal bones, like raised animals.
Oh, sorry,
And
different one. Because I'm pretty certain we also found evidence of human sacrifice.
I don't remember.
Oh, I can send you the paper for that one later. There were a whole bunch of skeletons crushed unnaturally, which is usually not a sign that they died a normal, peaceful death. That was the one, remember, where somebody asked, maybe they were just very clumsy. Okay, sorry. There is some ongoing disputes. I remember a few years ago there was not. Okay, this is the situation is always changing. A few years ago there was not evidence of yeah, I'm reading, yeah. Not evidence of people living there, at least as far as I was aware. Evidently that's embattled, but yeah, the very mysterious site, not in some eldritch sense, just in the sense that there's a lot of open questions about the symbolism and the meaning and why people built it. I would love if Hancock's argument that he notes that there's 36 to 200 buried cities in the same area, like underground cities. Sorry.
Yeah.
And the massive discrepancy there is 36 with more than 2 floors, 200 with 2 floors. So 200 shallow underground cities, 36 deep ones. I agree with him that they are all but certainly not created by the Phrygians, because no ancient Greek source ever talks about this. and they would definitely have mentioned Phrygian underground cities, especially because the Phrygians were the butt of a lot of jokes in late antiquity. So if the Phrygians were using underground warrens to hide away, there I would 100% expect references to their cat. There's a lot of jokes about how they were a bunch of cowards. I agree with them. It's older than the Phrygians. I am rather obviously not convinced that they're 11,600 years old. I would love it if that was the case, though, because that would mean that we have 200 underground cities contemporaneous with these giant above-Earth megaliths, and in what is all but certainly the same civilization.
Yeah.
And that would be earth-shattering. That would be an earth-shattering archaeologue. Probably not the case, but that would be an earth-shattering discovery. We're probably going to have to do a second review stream because we have not gotten to how Hancock handles symbolism.
Yeah.
And exegetes myths. We've talked about it a little, but we wanted to go into like navels, hand signs. I had a lot of issues with his approach to therianthropy. But we're running out of time. We don't really like to go over 2 hours. So we are probably going to call it here and do a second stream about this exact topic.
Yeah.
By which time I imagine we'll have more to say about a lot of what we already said anyways. So thank you very much for everyone who showed up. That was an absolute honor having you all here. And a pleasure, and I hope you all have wonderful dreams of giant Amazonian citadels in deep pools under the earth. I have been Wild Philosopher. He has been Ryan Rose.
Yep.
Have a very good night.
May the Atlanteans be with you.
May the Atlanteans be with you.